So hello, Tashi Delay. I am Chad Ellington, hopefully going to cover a little bit of energy today.
Some Tashi Delays, Chad Ellington, yes, and Tiring so Shuk Korge, Joshikachi, and Motochians.
One thing I wanted to mention is that if anybody has any questions, to please interrupt whenever you feel it's appropriate, relevant to what's being covered.
Tak Chechula, Narangal Honsen Trippy capsule, Honsen on draw your sugar draw your paimana, Aningala Katu Kachi, any Tua Shajat on a degrees.
And I think you might be able to see my board behind me. I thought I would write a few equations that you might have seen earlier. I could be using some slightly different symbols than Dimple used. I believe she wrote a D for the delta X.
I will check with them. Chetsuti Tongodo Gelagi Karpangan to Jude Tongode. Tongomendo.
They might see you.
Yeah, we cannot see clearly. They cannot see clearly.
Okay, so I'll try to write on the screen when it's appropriate. These are all formulas you should have seen already. Okay, so we'll continue on then. So wanted to start first with a question to try to introduce energy. And the question is simply, how long does a particular force last?
Shooting motor chibi capsule, and it tambotilla young Nubati motor chimpi capsule, energy motor chim capsule to tambotilla yet troachi in Swa. Shooting each a general nigger is a troatina.
And the question itself is somewhat vague because it can mean a couple of different things depending upon how you interpret it.
That they capsule to the Binaroa, shooting each general nigre said the capsule to the ko Sekashita Yomaris, wa Nichorango Kualentamando Latin, digging on Tomando at Sunsibiores.
Specifically, those two words, how long? So yesterday, Alfredo covered a little bit of one of the possible answers.
The Kesang in the Caps again, Alfredo la ge Tanda de la and this Sipigi, Len Chirwa, and a Kogaticola Mutotis nonsense.
And this possible answer was that the force acts over some time in terms of length.
That under the Capsua, the Capsa Shuchirua, and a 2-inch Karanlaya, 2 Kasuch Karanga Pocres at Teres.
And this was, I don't believe Alfredo defined it, this term that we refer to as impulse, which is equal to force times time.
The Tandagiti Laya Sarpa Dagner lash to a Dagner said impulse said the Kesson, Chesula Moto Pichet and the Chio Sames. That the Dagner said the can get the Sungresena, shoot the Tutsula Juratan Sungres.
And if I were to write it out mathematically, I would have F times, and I will still write delta T.
And the laying on single going to trigger in by now. And shoot force the F to shoot so at you, 2 in the Lolaya, need to so in Jura delta T is litrians.
So here it is, just showing it again in terms of and here, of course, now I've dropped the delta symbol that I have. Impulse is F times T, delta T.
Then they can sing as a Dagner said, and shoot there, and you could do so in Jura, data trigger Juratan Sungres.
This this definition arises from some of the equations that you've already seen before, such as Newton's second law.
다 단다기 그 당을세 대기 고통 란탄데로와 아니 그 계산 최초 통차벽이 냠지치니 종말에 스타 비셔샤바는 뉴턴 같은 니와 따보니 종말에
which I just wrote F equals ma.
다티 가서게 슈데 뉴세데 디세데 뉴널라지리스 티샤이스.
But acceleration can also be written as the change in speed or change in velocity over the change in time. The delta symbols only mean change in.
단단히 가서가 저거 뉴런스의 acceleration 뉴런스의 에데 아니 그 뉴색인 주로ati 뛰기 주로고 그는 거래서 단단히 값은 저게 텔라티스와 가서 delta selede the knowledge system touch도가 이게 주로세 뒤송이레스.
So if we make this substitution back into Newton's second law,
Taketing asu tanda기 A기 tanda toptong sawachles marwa tining asu Newton ke tantingi pagnalaya ni chubaina.
we get mass times delta V over delta T.
Hanta de kasang asu karira gres na shude ni delta V the delta T guchu gujwa tan subares.
So then we can just multiply the delta T across to the other side.
단단가 수게 delta T 지요와 뒤쪽은 지로한테 아니 파쇼살라에 땅 주줄바이나.
And that gives us that expression F delta T, which is defined as being impulse.
And for the next one, you need delta V, not T.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Good catch. You see, I think I can, oh no. How do I erase it? It's Control E. Yes. Thank you.
Under the Banang Asulaya, Yansho Sala Karagado, shoot the data Tigijuratan, Sotalaya, deset the data Vigijuratan Somodwa. Yes.
And
the question. The color the courage choice in a color sembaji tiracha, the Kalamao the Digan Tonga Wushudo.
Can you use like maybe yellow or white color instead of red?
Or the pen. Does anybody know how to do that with PowerPoint?
I don't know. They're asking if you can change the color of the pen that you are using. Currently, you have red color.
Yes.
That's kind of a little difficult for them to see.
I don't know how to change the color in PowerPoint for that. If, oh, I might. Let me try to modify the tool and let me see. I'm gonna have to minimize you for one second. This might take just a second.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, nope, it won't change the color. Would it, oh, I can't change the color that I know of.
Yeah, it's not possible.
It's fine. Dig.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Let me get so I can see you back. 1 second. I lost some of the Zoom controls.
Do you have I'm just checking on Google, it says draw on slide during a presentation.
There's an option for that. Do you know where to find it? Slideshow.
Do you have on the somewhere there's an option that you can click as a pen? Under that there is called let's see, pen color.
Do you know which tab it is? Because I see home, insert. I can.
It seems in the pen, this one.
In the
Oh,
drawer
yeah.
pad.
View, presenter view, you will get the pen and right click on that. There is ink color.
Presenter view. Where do I view presenter?
Can you exit from there?
Um,
Oh no, I mean like stop the slide.
Below there
show.
is a pen.
Yep.
There is a pen.
And there is a ink color.
No, below that, go to the left bottom.
down.
No, in the present view, presenter view, slideshow. If you go, click that, left bottom, this one, right click on that. There should be pen.
You
Color
guys
is
are
there.
sneaky.
Color. That color doesn't change. Yeah, there is a color over there, right?
Yeah.
Yellow. Okay, there we go. We need yellow. Thank you so much. You know more than I do, obviously. I lost some of my notes. I will quickly write this here. We had F delta T equaled mass times delta V. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So even though here we have the delta only acting on the V, often the mass does not change. So we can move the delta to include both of them.
That under the capsule shoot the data T Giroati, the data Vigi Girata, Songures. That under the capsule Suge, Nuboti, the that the capital and Jurandugo Meta, Atsugi Jura said the delta Chitua, Susum touched to the Kutak Chlola, pressure the police, the capsule Labana, the Setil and Jurandugo Marwa, is Tambalaya Chlotan and the police.
And it's really this equation why we defined this quantity mv in terms of being this other quantity momentum. Alfredo discussed momentum yesterday, but it's really the mathematics of these equations of why we define them that way.
That the Kesang also again Alfredo like Gutse said the Karimbati Kesang Utrichisha resta deal at any dating also Gutse say the Karsubrita.
Okay, so move on to the next slide. Another way to describe that question that we had a little while back, which you've probably forgotten, is that the force could act over some distance.
Yang Atsugi Toatila Len and Dash detection that you is snatches the Temba J service, J. That Toati in Baina so shoot you any Jantachi like Papa in Baina, Roa. Any career research or what, or taking it into this.
So we define some new quantity as being this expression that is going to be force times distance. I'll write it two ways, force times distance, which is the D that Dimple used a few days ago. And I'll also write it as F delta X as well.
And the caption also la Sarwachi Nongores, ko shoot the Jantak Juruati, and Kesang also again Dimple like because D said the Jantala D to Shire, and also Yanko distance and that you're going to Chipina, shoot the any delta X tako Jantak Juraj or what Tijurat Songores.
Yeah, the variables just depend what you're comfortable in using.
That other day get you Japan Jurwa, the children can get do my deep on the chorus.
We define this as being work, and the symbol for that is just a capital W.
That and they tell I am Borsetela, shoot the Jantala Jurbig and Borsetela, young as to Leka Sigris. Thing as to carry some pechigres and W chambuting some pechigres.
I should mention this definition is really only valid for the simple cases where the force acts on an object in the same direction the object moves.
That Tandagi day by night, Tandagi Leka Chia get you Tenichi or what, shoot a Jantala Jurbu research or what. They carry resena, and if the Nathan tab, they shoot on any cool carsa, 아니 뉴보테기 고추가 인지기 가쇼 직촌인비기 딱고 니땅 딱 되는다고 지라야 디 잡고요레스.
It gets more complicated when we deal with angles.
아하. 로다 단다기 딱 디시티 값을 차고요레스. 딱 게딩아 주고 슈당 그거 루야당 뜻을라야 아니 술체 해봐야 마나 술 만들어 가는 술체 술크기 세딘 담다지 해봐야 마나 아니 녀탕 살도요레스.
So this direction has to be taken into account. So there's a couple of things that we have to take into account when we talk about work. The first one is that the force is in the same direction as the motion or distance.
단다가 수가 레가세기 계제시온 스타발라야 내동 같이 중이고요. 레스와 다시가레세나 나속에 슈 대학이 가족대 아니 뉴보티 땅 구초 땅야기 가족 쓰고로 하다 하나 뉴보티기다 그 구초 땅사기 장타주로 티 가족 땅 진촌연구요. 레스.
And the second thing to keep in mind is that whether the object actually moves or not needs to be considered.
다 신다티 가르서 그러잖아 뉴보테 문에 땅는 구초 땅두 문두세 대야 델라양 삼지 땅고요. 레스.
So work is force times distance.
한당 속에 슈 레가세티 슈데 장타가 주었던 성고요. 레스.
There's a couple categories of work.
한다 레가라 코 이와치 바인바나 레가라 이와 카지요. 레스.
One is that work that could be done against other forces.
한다 피차샤나가 속에 다 슈치키 카텔라야 드피게 레가 되나요. 레스.
Some examples of that could be work done against gravity, work done against friction, work done against a spring.
피차샤바나가 속에 텐슈크 카텔라 레가 드바타와타 야나 고시크 고시타 야나 der슈게 카텔라 레가 드바 tene ngasudi ora dentsi gi ane kogi khatela lika dubate to koyo res.
In those cases, the force is given by what force it is that we're acting against, whether it's gravity, whether it's friction.
Hanta tita ka kapse kogi shuti karige kutuchigi yoresena ane ngatsugi khatet jisagi shukari yimen tegi kutuchigi yores pichashana ngatsugi tenshuki khatel jiwa bana tenshuki kutuchiache ayana darshuki roa darshuki khatela likachigo bana shukti darshuki kutuchigi res.
So you often know what the F is in the formula, even though you're not explicitly given it.
That de kapsim bana degi shutirwa chitsula tachiga mixiki teme paimbaina ya ko shurla ya netun ditala tentete chesuge shuti kari imengi buyores.
The other category of work is work that changes the speed of an object.
Ta shuke mashumas lekage iwa shendachi kare sena nyubu chikero nyubu chike joksela njirwa tangaya gi chete dripige ani lekatires.
And gravity, of course, could be one of those. When you drop something a certain distance, the weight of that thing acts over that distance, changes its speed.
Picha shabaina atires karsa tenshu cherwa tigala ya kogen yubuchike decision ngubu shabaina tig tende de ane koge di karsa koge anjoksela yanjrandu yores.
Streak lines, just drawing a ball falling. So let's ask a question. Is work done by a person holding a heavy weight, a barbell above their head, stationary.
That trust tangi so get the michike ane jinda ke yuche derwa jinda ke yuche ta se janga ke yuche derwa jitsen dra ke yuche de susugun gug thela yara cha ane gug thela yara cha jin gucho tang me pigi ne kab jimbaina ro yara cha yores ane gucho tang yo mares gug thola zon de yores tige kabla ya ne khuge leka chigi yorwes.
Do they care to have a
Yes, yes.
proposed? Yeah.
Leka chigi yorwes tikapsa.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, and you can say yeah. How many people say yes? How many people say no? No, one in the back say no. Other than
So someone
Lots of
says
say
no,
yes.
most say yes. Okay, good. I like it when there's dissension.
chike ane liga chigyo mari la sens senda samage liga chigyo sens.
Let me click. So in the process of lifting the weight up, yes, there is work done. But
Tanga suge jinda ko yuchi chiyoro jinda ko yuchi te yaran daga jimbi ka kapsis ro ya chaga jimbi ka kapsis liga chigyo res na chigyo res. Yena ya
but once it's up and is stationary for that time that you're just holding it above your head, there is no work done.
Deni yang ko gola ya cha chetan gugi thela ya kum gucho tangje mepi ge nikaptela ya likachigyo mares.
It almost begs the question that if you help a friend move, you take a box and carry it a certain distance and you don't lift it up. You just move it sideways.
That day yang ko bisa shenda chkanane kari do chungor sena chorunga rokpa chila ya ka tokpu chila ya rokpa chi de ti ne yara chig chabi ge ngebu chigwa yara chig chabi ngebu chig do ane ne sacha jenda chila ya ko porwa ta yara chakyo mara susuge ro charung muni ya chakyo mara ya chig chabi ngebu chig ne rokpa chig tokpu chila rokpa chi de ton sacha chig ne sacha jenda chila ya chwa ton ane ni ton te chuparis.
What's odd is you actually do no work in carrying it from one spot to another at the same height.
Cancer you but the caress na tutse tilaya njura matang gane ching you but this niche in niche and the chilaya kiba in banati capsule lekachi yo mares.
Gendawa.
Yes.
Di ka danda kola walk get sangi the singi do ani walk mewa karsiris. Pena walk get singi de force times distance la ro. Ko ya kya be kapsu force gan la kya bade de ro. Distance de kola do. Chada singi de sang do singi chanda ko walk karsin maris.
His question is he thinks in this case it still has the definition. It still satisfied the definition of work and why no work is done.
When it's stationary above your head,
yes,
it's you'll still get tired, but you'll do no work.
Ta nikap de la ya chu kalita kagres nimbana likachi yo maris so wachi yo maris.
It's strange. What's really odd is individual muscles in your arm contract and then relax and then contract and relax and do it, that on an individual basis, individual muscles they do a little bit of work, but on average it goes to, well, when they relax they do negative work, and then when they constrict and hold it up they do positive work, and so it averages out to zero.
Kasugre ngasuge ya champi kapsa telata bana ngasuge ta shadam ge thapon re ngo ge lekachitan ta bana ko ta kulhelo chapi kapse nga su le ka te ta ko khasho do doma chagorwa motan chagorwa ne kumbi kapse putang chagores imbana da chama nyam te chi chodum che pa imbana la ko chagores.
The equation I have written here is how much work is done in lifting it up to that height D, but once stationary in that time interval, there's no work being done.
Ta tanda di kapse de la yang asu ki triatikal lika chia ge de la ya ani ta nyubu te yara chapi kapse lika kapse chi ge yo me te ani ti nyamsi di ge ten sha yes ro ina yang yara chak chabi jela ya lika chi ge yo ma des. Also I like that delta D or like delta X.
The delta X, yes.
Yeah.
So if we rewrote it that way, it would be instead mg delta X.
And also you have mentioned, I think you have mentioned that the force and the distance need to be, the change in distance need to be in the same direction, right? Yeah.
And so, yeah, in this case, you're lifting it up and the force you exert on it has to be equal and opposite to the weight of it. So that's why it's still mg acting upwards.
That under the kapsirwa chorongi ya chabi kapsirwa tanda tanga sugi leka sa de nyoksa sochi ore ta tela nga sugi leka zu jushayro penoni tsewa zu jushadwa rasana chula tsewa zu jushadwa ta de kapsike chishite ko janthala ya jrachi gugo yorwa ya chagda bukasun jro yo mara chigtere nibatela ya ani tampo chani shabi kapse shu ta ani ko ge janthala jruan ruan cha ni khashok chila gugo resagdwa ko leka ge chani chashete Istanbul tike chamchakora tanda de kapse ko yara chabai kapse wata yara chapi kapse ta ya gana de pi kapse leka chigi yo masta yo mare kashila baina susu yara tapata ane nyubo te ge dise ge marala themba ni ta ko chipa chandu gortang ko chutang me pi kapse.
And there could be some arguments that once you pick it up off the floor, the force you have to exert on it is greater than the weight of it. That is true because you had to put it into motion going up. But when you get near the top, you actually exert a slightly less force on it to allow it to slow down. And so really all I'm discussing is the average force over the lifting.
Ta tanda gelak dus reshi jabi kapsin baina ko ta ko yar dos ta sani ya langchi ya da tene gola ya chabi kanza ge ta chanyong ge ani shuka suchi jayo me tege ne tanten reshi jago yes imbaina ya chirga su samno tamba baina tampo sa ga na yara tampo de sa ga na yara ndapi kapse shu tes chi chwa jago yo res kachla baina ko la ya nyenon chi che go yo wa ko jintang guchutang me pi ganen guchutang yo ping wala du yo wa ani yang ko nga sung gu gangla yara ta le ma le ngon to ala ya ko ya ko guchute chitala du yo wa te kapse yo shu tes chwa yo wa imbaina tanda gi ani degi chi ya ndashim bi degi paro ge shu tes ke shon stambala ya ko ge chanyong ge shi te ke je yes.
So another question, if we have an object, how much more work is done in lifting it twice as high?
Ta tanda nga suge shenda chi roa pichon chi de yen sta de le gangla ta dobo chi kuyang kore ya daga doa roa leka ya tang doa de kapsa ko ge those de da mi ge thosa chi la ya cha ba ina ane de la ya ane ko leka de manglo chi gu yo res.
And this is rather simple.
Ta de tanda dus nga su nyam su ta tshana ta biu de doa. Tosate dab ni gi am kropewa imbaina ku ti tayala ya lekati ni manglo chigures.
Mar door mar.
Ta mar kasus tugures ta.
Dabchik ma chigo yurike.
Eta dabchi ma sena ta ngasu dabni gi chwasa gorwa. Right.
Dam yichirda re.
Yeah, twice.
Yeah,
Twice more.
and this, we're just lifting it twice the distance. So the work is just simply doubled. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I was trying to write W1 for one instance and W2 for a second instance.
Ta dada de pesen de la ta ba imbaina ngasu ge leka the W1 sa te ani ko thutse ta mawate la ya chawache ani W2 te ani tanda ge thutse te ge ta dabni gi thwa chorwa. Tela kiwi gi ani chansha yes.
So another question related to work is how much work is done if you push against an immovable object, a wall, a tree. You're pushing against it with all your might.
Ta chorong ge shi yetse tan de ani gucho pe te tam thya ge ni bu chi de bijak tang ge res pichashana ani chang da ta ya shingo da te da da ta chon gucho tam thya ni bu chi la bijak tang ge res tan de kap sin ba na ni chorong ge leka ka su chi res.
Yaga zero race, yaga yo mares. Yaga yo mares.
Chigo mares.
Yeah, several people saying it's zero, no work is done.
Yeah, no distance, no work is done. We might not know how big of a force we exert, but it doesn't matter. Anything times zero is zero.
Ta tanda de kapsro wa ngasu ge ta shu katsu ja ma je te ngasu ge de kapsa nenga ke yo mares wa ko ta shu te ta de kapsa ko jantha chi ge dogo yo marwa te ngasu ge x de lan jwa dogo yo marwa ani ko tangka kanlo chi ge lekol ge jusha ba na thotan de lekol ge legre stes namba leka chi yo mares.
So this is just covering some of the formulation of it. Work is force times distance.
Ta tanda de yang chi chitan chi chimba na tanda ngola nga chunde si jabatirwa lika se te ka re se na shu de ani janta pe jurgu yo res.
And then we refer to the unit of force is the Newton, and the capital N is the symbol.
Ani nga so shu ki tsi de Newton res ani ko tabdi tri bai na n chembu ti na chunde chi res.
And the unit of distance is meter or lowercase m.
Ani janta ke tsi de wa meter ta ani ko m chwa ge chamba chi res.
So we end up with a new unit, or it's really complicated unit for work, is the thing we call a Newton meter.
Ta tanda lika ge tsi de la nota so chi yo res. Ko tsi de ka res na Newton meter se des.
And it's so complicated, we decide to give it a new unit, which we refer to as the joule.
Ani te ko nyokla sawo yo san de la nga su ge min sawa chi ko te sha yo res. Te min sawa te leka ge tsi ge min sawa te ka res na joules res.
And we'll see here that the joule is the unit that we're going to use for all energy.
Ta tanda nga su kari thong ko res na joules ge tsi de ani nyuba ge ro chama ge na pe che thong chi thong res.
And the bottom portion down here is just for those who want to know the very detailed specifics of those units.
Ta ke ti go wala tamba te ke te cherang ge ani joules chi ke ta tsi na la ani ko ta jir tang bai ba na ro ko shu tsa tang ba na kar kar chi ndu ge me sa te tan sha yes.
So let's look at another example and try to compute out the work done when a 20 Newton force pushes some cart a distance of 3.5 meters.
Ta de ka tsi ja ro chi tsi kar ja go re se na ro. 아니 shoot neutron 니슈 배치 당대 되러와 아니 랭커 지로와 랭커스나 단 리커스나 버커스나 카리나 리커 단 랭커 콜로 요사게 되너와 랭커 지 아니 미터 심상나라야 beja 당바 임바나 아니 리카 가소치 지요바 테스 자로치스
They can compute it. I'll just try to draw the situation.
Couple of minutes or just
Sure.
Karma Kashichi is the page 2 or 3 minutes. 3 minutes, do you think? And then the Gallagher remote yes, Rodney and Dankor Tirwata. That they Tashintal and the Dankol and the Karina to that the Bajatango is what the Karmanism cheers, Chitujaro Chiesa, Kasore dosa. Shun Newton, you should Peshutan de any Delay and Dankors to what they call meters in Sangala and Bajapan by Bana, Nilikakatsuchi Resa.
joules instead of.
Oh, they quick.
Takashita Jagamindu that, Ta Desha, Ta the name of Trigger.
70 joule.
I need my
70
calculator. You guys are too quick. Yes.
Euro.
Sushi. That's all.
I won't write it out. Sounds like everybody's got it, right?
Yeah, several people saying they got 70. Tamala Leso, I'm just asking if everybody got 70. Tamala Dinchilese. That's all, yeah. Look like everybody got 70.
Okay, good. Awesome.
Hey, Aldous.
So here's another question which we actually can't answer without some more info.
That under the layer to us and that years. That to a dinner which Tansha Baina, Natsulaya to a date on the chatting per much may by not to the landed Kumaris.
So the question is, what force does a rock exert on the ground that weighs 10 newtons and it's dropped from 10 meters up?
That to a did race, and a Kugi Jitela or Newton Chuchengi and a douche, Jitela and Newton Chuchengi douche, and a co meter Chugasani, and a co ma Sagju Paimbanas, that meter Chugasala and Gushu maybe in the ma Sagju Paimbana, and a do take a Sagumula Yashuka Suchipores.
And I ask here rhetorically, what is the other information that we need in order to figure out what force stopped the rock?
That Tandai take up so that dick up some other Chishenda Chikari Google is that do this Hala Poppy cups to Kugan Guchut and Gogo, Goyala Yashukari Google is.
We could compute how much work is done in the rock falling.
It's not Gore, Shenda Telaya, and Dotima Sapi Kapsuku, Lika Katsuchim, it's not Gores.
We can compute what the rock's speed is when it hits the ground.
That Shenda Karsena Kuge Dote Sala and Jorbi Kapsuro, Sala 2 pickups and Nursetsnal Gores.
But we still can't figure out what the force is.
Yimbainayan, Dikapsang Asuk shooting Kanda Anong Asuk Mendus.
I should be specific, the force that stops the rock.
Goyala yang Azukar Subreta, Dutin Goyala ya Shuka Sopechitom Sigorati.
Do they care to propose what is another piece of info that we need to figure out the force?
They college to carry inside the Sambudus, that they Masuge Karsugre, shoot its hell or what I could shoot its hell or what? 아니 고야기 다 차팅 파마티 가리 인사레스.
Acceleration कोगी sir.
Acceleration, one saying acceleration.
Okay, so that is one possible answer, that if I believe they mean when they say acceleration, they're not talking about gravity, but the acceleration that the rock experienced when it hit the ground.
단다게 acceleration shape 값을 아니 ngachu tension 비긴 유넌 뛰면 받지 유넌 shape 값을 고 도데로와 도데 살아 포비니 값기 유넌 디시고 지was.
And that would be one thing that you could use. Yes.
대 저런 거 배추 단초배기 담까지레스.
심바디 되세 인지르게.
Momentum.
One person say mass.
The mass of the ground. We know the mass of the rock.
Yeah, mass of yeah. 단다게 되세 세팅 아주 되게 디 값을 되세 테션과 갈수 그래. 거기 더 되세 인다이렉트 테셔로 도데가 제 단다체 되세 시스템을 사기 되세기 US. 네 챤다시게 the momentum 세기도 another person say momentum.
That's close. That would be useful. We do know the speed when it hits the ground, and then we would know that it drops to 0 momentum when it hits the ground. There's a relationship between momentum and forces.
지에 때 야고 서차치 인스그레스 로anga 속에 거기 gutse momentum 스는 gutse긴 지로아틱 셰피 값이 바이나 gutse 당anga 속에 슈크 바로라양 되어요로와 아니 단다 다 도테 살아 포피 값이 바이나 가서 가르치고 그래서나 거기 gutse 때 레코드 차고요로와 인스탄반 대양 서차치 인스그레스.
And that term was impulse.
단단한 속에 뒤책인 지로한테 당을 임바.
And impulse was force times.
당을게 맹가 가래 그거 신류 가래 슈디 가래를 줄고 그래.
Change momentum ro.
Time.
Delta T sir, Delta T.
Delta T. Yes. So we do know the change in momentum when the rock hits the ground, because we would figure out what the speed was when it hit the ground, and then it drops to 0. To compute out that force, if we knew how long the rock took to stop, then we could compute the force.
다 단다디가 서디 다른 자리에서 아속에 다 살아 포비게 도티 살아 포비게 니카블라야 콜레 뉴르세치오로 아래 말에 뉴르세치오로와 아니 티기 제라야 그거 뉴르세 레코 차고요로 다 티기 갑텔라야 아니 딱군 거스담발라 레코 차고로와 내 말에 살아 포마 포게 니카블라야 그거 뉴르세 쳔보요로 다 뉴르세게 지로와텔라 텐디 데딩 아속에 아니 gutsekin jurate chitko resta tela tene de nga suge shudi chet korsta tanda de kapse nga sula kete nga sula ko gane mankori sa jirwa salaya hoyalaya junringlong goyagi titseti hakuyo paina titseti nga so haku paina nga suge kuge shuka choju koyo metis kres.
Okay, so that's essentially what we were getting at, was this time that it took the hit, and whether it's soft ground, hard ground, that affects the time and the force.
단다디 값심바나 가서 고야티 티소 가서지 응고만 것들이서 티소 가서지 응고만 것들이서 다그 말아 사사게 사티 고 첩부 임바다 니무 임바카리 이면 되게 거기에 tisotilaya ko chapterzo gorwa istamba tisotila chapterzo gore tilatene dete matso shukti chetkuyoris.
I perhaps should have had this earlier, closer to impulse than now when we discussed work, though.
Chichinang asuge dete tanda leka ke nikum de la ya treat ma chu che te ga ngola nga su ga dang de se ja bi ka se to the train pe che ta ta sa yes.
Another term that or helps refine work is this idea of power.
Then leka ge ku ge ngo te la ya that karsugreta chigita desheta discuss u jaga chete shenda nga sula ya ki shenda chigores ta te la ya power sigre top sigres.
Because work is simply force times distance, you can take any amount of time to perform a certain amount of work.
Ta de kapsirwa ngasuge lega se ti shute janthala ya jurgu yesa ani choronge shute janthala jurage lega te chi tangka nyamba baina ya lega te choronge chi tiche ta tongtong chikna dunand kore tiche rimpu chikna dunand kuyores.
So power basically refines how quickly you did the work.
Ta dege top se dege kare chi ko sambar chi gore se na choronge leka chi chi yores imbaina choronge leka te joglo chindu se te sambar chi yores.
So small time intervals would yield larger powers.
Ta ke te leka te chiwala ya tisu nyong goryo paina to ma yores.
The more units, work is in units of joules, time is units of seconds.
Ta zishi ngoto chi paina nga su top go zishi ngoto chi paina de kapsa leka se zoa se leka ge zishi ti nga su joule res ani tisu ge zishi ti nga su ge karchana sigres.
We're getting too deep into units, so we just define power as being a new unit, the watt.
Ta nga su ge de kapsa top se ge zishi saba chi ngoto chi gres de top ge zishi saba de milaya watt sigres.
And too much detail to really spend time on it if they want it.
Ni ke de che su de la ya shi tsop ko tani to ba yin ba na ko ge ane zishi ge tupcha ta ju de lo ko yes.
So let's look at it. Oh, this is just to give you an idea of how much 1 watt is. It's roughly how much energy required to lift a single apple 1 meter in 1 second.
Ta de nga su watt chi se gorwa to ki zishi watt chi ki chechon te kan ro chi re se na ani cherang ge ro ani gushi chi ro gushi chi ani karcha chi na la ya meter chi ya ren da ge ku wi ge ni wa te ton song go res.
Just having fun drawing while they're, so that's just the energy of 1 watt. I really like mathematics, obviously. So here's some more equations relating power to work and substituting in things.
Ta top se bi kapse ani ko ge nyam chi shenda do chi chapla chi de ta mu shenda kana do chi chon yu me te ta yes.
So work, recall, is force times distance. Maybe I'll use the D here.
Nga chu chiten chi che ba yin ba na leka se ti ka re se na shu de ani jang se ge jora tang song ge res.
Maybe I'll write it again as delta X.
Tata nga su ge de jang tha te ge chapla ya yang ko jang tha jora zli data x tonight korwa.
But if you notice, delta X over delta T is this quantity we know as speed.
Eti chorong ge ya kasa delta x to delta 2 jang tha kun jora ti tu kun jora la go ba yin ba na te nga su ge ti ba kasa di ba jok ba.
So we can also write that power is equal to force times speed.
Tanga suga tila tende ta kadastina degrees na top seti ane shugde nyursegi jura tanya tsungyo res.
This is relevant because you might realize to keep a vehicle going at a constant speed down the road, you have to apply a force to it to keep it going at that constant speed. This allows you to compute what the power is if you knew the force applied and could measure the speed.
Tade pentobio res kete chorange nyubo chigro tandagi chorange talankhor chigro lankhor chig nyurse chipa gane dugo palaya nyurse chipa gane duala ya tinalo tapshitang yo paina chorange telaya shuka so chig tegyo mechigro o tenga suge ani tsijat kyores.
So multiple ways we can write out power. Power is work over time, and power is force times speed.
Tanga suga top se tela ya kundete mabodo aswa legati tisogun jura gona dekore yana shu de nyursegi joshan dekores.
So much of physics is intertwined.
Tanda de kasi bana ngam kamge ta ko touch mambo chi ta ko titete yores.
So another example. Calculate the power done when a 20 Newton force pushes a cart 3.5 meters within a time of half a second.
Tanda de kapse top di cerochis ro top di ro top cerochis. Ani shu Newton ni shu ju chike ani dankor chiga ani ko din karcha nga karcha cheka grang la ro karcha lekor sanga ge din la ya meter sun sanga me ja tang bai na ani top ka chores top de chijarochis.
And remember, we already did half of this problem just a few slides ago.
Tanda de ge nga su ge tis ko la ya de peche tang yo ba de ani che su ge temperature chis nga su chija yores de tang lo chi.
Not Newton's, it's Joule's shed. Am I giving it away? I'm giving it away, aren't I?
No, don't give that. Cassilis.
140 watt. 140 watt.
140 watt.
Jada shipju
Watt. 140 watt.
140 watt.
Watt.
Okay, good. Tried to keep it from, we did it earlier, 70 times 2 divided by a half. Yeah, it's all the same.
tanda de ngala nga su sujab chi til hede ra de kapse tegi cheka chinga su ngoma sujab ba tigas ko dinchule smarwa ta tanda de ko lekor sanga go se jesna jata shi tambares.
Okay. Okay, so now we transition into energy.
Ta tanda nga su ge nibala ta yes.
Energy is tricky. It's not anything we can touch or really directly see.
Ta niba se te sungo nyopo yores wa nga su ge ta karsagore lapa thula tkamare miki thwa tkamares.
But it's both a thing and also a process.
Ta tikar sena ko chetan chig gane ko nyubu chig bas ko ta nyubu ro chig mu gana deshe jagre ya shenda chig gane deshe jon stambala ya ko jirim chig mu gana deshe jangres.
We claim we observe it, but the observing it is really only when it's changing or being exchanged from an object into the environment.
Tanga sugu nyuba te chinga sugu tonsong ta chikasugura tashi tonsong deshe jagu yores wa imba na nga sugu linda do nyuba te ta chiga tapshi chunga te kati ungure sena ta khorik na ne wa rongshong khamla na khorik na ne chigni chigla ya jijur chia ta chigni chigla ya karsugura ta pewi kapsi imba na jijur chi kapsa jine nga sugu ta chiga ti yoba te chorgu yores.
And it can also show up in multiple forms, such as just simply being in a location, you have energy. If you're moving, you have energy. If you're vibrating or oscillating, you have energy.
Ta koge junse mampo chila tene de tenga su nyuba te yo chko yore ta chi bai na tampo te koge nesa ro koge sani ba na nesa tila tene de ten ko la nyuba te na yore jene koge ta nga su ge guchu chi yo pai ba na ro guchu chi wala tene de tan niwa yore shenda chi gane ane ko nga su ge dingu chi wa ro ko yam ta nga su ge jardu chi ling guchu chi ga na ba chi ro tinda do chi bai na yo tela tene yo niwa yore.
And we often, if you look up a definition of energy, it's often known as the ability to do work in terms of the physics definition of work.
Tanda leka se de kapse income centric tang income centric kapse ko leka ke tseniti karisha gre sena leka dripi thni de la ya ane nibasigres.
One of the versions of energy is known as the energy of position or potential energy.
Ta tanda nga su niba ge ko ngu chigte kare sena ko ge nesa la tu be ane niba tisigres ta de la nga su nitu nibasigres.
This is energy that is stored in some way and can be used later on.
Ta de nitu nibasa te ngu ko ta niba de sonyer chi yo pakansh la yan chela pechu tanga yu niba de res.
When we talk about potential energy in terms of mathematics, we often abbreviate it as a PE for potential energy, or sometimes as a uppercase U.
Ta danda nga su ge income cent kana ne ro cha su pechu tanga de tande nitu niba de chombe kapsa samsamla nga su ge PE se tig chombe chigre samsamla U se tig chombe chigres.
It depends on which textbook you're looking in or which website.
Ta de ko chorange chiga loktep kari peche tamata ta chiranga taja kange la zuma ziki chapra gane ko den chak chiga peche tangures.
Some common examples of potential energy is that's in a stretched bow.
Ta nga chuge netu ge nibate ko ta yongche ge tamango pichunda uchi shaba bana nga chuge shi de changba na shi de da ko tembi kaps de ge nanglo la ya niba chi sonye chi ro te na yo des.
Trying to see if I had a bow here. I don't. Or a rubber band. If you put a rubber band around your fingers and pluck it, or before you pluck it, you have potential energy.
다 양 지타 칭아 선 지간에 두스콘데 단테스 탐비 가스로 말루고 몰라서 보다 탐비 값을 되나나요 코네티니 바이오레스.
Well, you've got these days we have masks everywhere. There's potential energy in that.
바테나네 탐비 값을 와 말루고 원타탈라서 보다 코나라야 네티니 바이오레스.
There's also potential energy that can be stored in a spring when you compress it or when you stretch it.
다 현대 칭아수가 덴츠요라 덴츠 스프링요라 덴츠치게 나로라양코 덴츠티마 센스마 츠비캅스요라 코 츠비캅스양 코나라야 네티니 바이오레 영나 템비캅스양 콜라야 네티니 바이오레스.
Sadly, the only spring I have here is very, very tiny. Here, there's no energy. It's at rest.
다 단다 닐라발라야 덴츠치도 와디 다바임바나 과천 춘춘치도 스타 단다 니나도 값임바나 콜라 그 나라야 니티니 바이오 마레스 칼치라바나 코다 그쵸 당금에 팔라 니와다요 와.
It's strong. It's really hard to compress it. Ooh. So springs.
다 덴츠 값을 와고 말아 츠비 값을 양코 니티니 바이오레스 아니 코야 템비 값을 니티니 바이오레스.
You can also have stored chemical energy within fuels.
아니 가수게 부지기나라야 양코 소녀지위게 진니티나 요레스.
And a classic example of potential energy is heavy objects held at height.
당가수 소징기스 그러다 소징기 비선치가레스나 저런 게 지고 사회 쪽에 유보지 그때 도체 강론치라야 야 답바이마나 야 답이 값을 때라야 니티노 요레스.
A classic example of gravitational potential energy used, I can't draw straight lines, is a pile driver. You lift a heavy weight and drop it on like a fence post to drive it into the ground.
단다데 값을 그 응아속에 스쿨하게 텐슐라 템비게 네트게 뉴바데게 아니 갈수 그랬다 비순치가레서나 아니 가속에 라콜라야 가속에 다 라콜 코르 와로 말해 가서 이온라 라콜 코르 스탐발라 라콜게 딱 가와스네 디코레 라콜 코게 가와도디 주고 버와 가와티 주야기 쳇더니 그 땅 유부지고 서우지가나 이 대당 아니 그 가와티스 거라다가 저 프로아티만 거리 주야라야 배치당 거 스타디 당가서 있다 용첩기에 스콜하게 텐슈게 아니 니티기 니바테 배치당 데테 아니 프로아이나 거래 가와티 사난 주야라 배치당 거레스.
The potential energy is it's available to you, but really we only discuss it when we are going to change it from potential energy into another form of energy.
단단 가서 네티브 뉴바티 요요레 심바나 가서 네티브 뉴바티 딱 같은 대세자가 같은 배치당 그래서나 네티브 뉴바티 뉴바 젠스쿠라야 주라탄 위 값이 신경 가서 딱 대세자는 거레스.
And when it comes to gravitational potential energy, it's really only defined relative to some other height.
다 텐시게 네티브 뉴바티라야 대세자운 스탐발라야 코다 뒤서튼 주거와 코 뉴부 셰지타야나 사체 셰지키라 뒤서튼 주거 간에 네 뉴부지가 토찰라케네 데테 가속에 아니 텐시게 네티브 뉴바티 대세자그레스.
Such as you sitting in your chair, you still have potential energy because you could still fall to the floor.
단다 제가 급작강라 대비 값을 제라야 네티기 뉴바요레스 가진라 바이나초 아니 사강라만 그래 사이기 딱할수 그래 되게 스차디요레스.
And we would only discuss your potential energy relative to the floor there, but you might be on the second floor of a building.
단다 가수가 네티기 뉴바텐데 시장배 값을 아니 단다 니초라 조사대 다음에 산이 지금 바로 그 뒤에서 된적 간에 같이 세우레스. 나 지지나 차는 컴파니 투가 나라 요스 바레스.
So then you would have a different potential energy relative to the other floor.
아하. 다 니탄 티 값이 임바나 게티처럼 토선 이발로 요바이나 아니 다 토선 담불라야 시샤 바인바이나 아니 시샤 케시샤 바인바나 졸라 요피게 니투 니바티 만도레스.
So it's important to keep in mind where you define your zero as being. Zero potential energy.
Can you repeat that again?
So it's important to remember where your zero potential
Okay.
energy is when you lift up an object.
다단단가 속에 텐슈크 니튜니와 데시자마 비캅스 아니 니과 치탄 케치슈치카레스나 저런게 니튜니와 레코르 작사치고와 찬족사치고와 레코르 샤사티카레 이멘티 아니 니과 케치보레스.
And it turns out that gravitational potential energy equals the amount of work needed to move the object away from your zero or ground.
단단디 값으로와 단다게다 스콜라게 값 텐실레 티비게 니티게 니바테 강게 통송거래서나 뉴보테로 아니 뉴보테 단다게 저런 게다 니티게 니바 레코스 지사테니 투세 거치라 키우기 지 리카치거와 리카테 통송거래스.
I think this slide continues on the next. So let me see. Yeah. So because gravitational potential energy equals the work done in raising it, it's important to look at the work done in raising it.
단다 텐시코 니티니바데 뉴보테 아니 투세 틴다도 지라야 아야 자야라야 아니 레카 가서지 민지라야 타고여서.
So the work done in raising it, the force on average equals the weight or mg of that object.
레카 값을 계산하는 담발아야 로아 단다게 가서 슈가 소치다고 그래서는 작년 제바이나 아니 뉴보데게 다 되세티 아니 스콜라기 텐슐레 템비 뉴노요로아 어떻게 접하던 성그레스.
And when we are talking about gravitational potential energy, we usually don't write delta x, but we call it the height.
다단다 가서 텐시코 네티니바 계산하는 담발아야 가서 델타 x에게 티페시던 거 말이야. 되게 차블아야 가서 투세에게 h 티페시던 거레스.
So then this is the work done in raising it up. And so we say that the gravitational potential energy, or PE, equals that mgh.
다 디카레스나 가서 뉴보테야 투세테나도 지라야 더발라 레카 가서 지면티 인자 아니 단다 가서 스콜라기 네트기 니바 텐슈기 네트기 니바 디카레스나 아니 md 지라 지르티 h 기조라던 성교레스.
I should probably say often instead of the capital U, we add a U subscript G to indicate gravitational potential energy.
다 디게 값을와 아니 그 유치부트야레 유티가 가서 쳐야돼 데 네트기 니바 성거와 아니 디가 올라야 유티가 올라야 아니 거기다 샤비 춘춘 지직트기 있어 지디가 가서게 텐슈 라텐비게 네트니와 임바성기스.
So it's just a notation, a small g to indicate gravitational potential energy. You'll see that in some textbooks and websites.
다 데데코 가서게 샤비 춘춘 지바 되게 다나 가서로 옆에 네트 니바데 텐식 네트 니바 임바 첨박이 치드레스 아니 데체 쪽에 나지 롯데 가시다 아니 지 다저 가시나 되는 데 통그레스.
Knowing that the gravitational potential energy equals the weight times the height is really what matters.
다 다데 값에 지니 외데가 레스나 아니 그게 다 텐슈키 네트 니바데 드체스고다 드스무사 지체데와 지체데 아니 도세게 줄고야데 아니 이거레스.
So another computation. Let's calculate the increase or the change in potential energy when a 20 kilogram block of ice is lifted 2 meters.
다 델라스자로 지스와 아니 킬로그램 니시오 비기 아니 차파지로 처럼 시간에 도세 미터 니라다 바이바나 티 값에 아니 니투기 니바 가서치 프라이오리스
Ooh, I should ask, what value of G are we using?
다들 값은 가지고 G요로 G 탄식이 뉴노요로 탄식라 템비 뉴노 되게 장가 가리 패치던 게 베스
10 meter per second square.
Yeah. Okay.
주 패치 단로 G's 10 meter per second square 10 meter per second square yes
Negative energy negative yorbe. Negative re positive. चलो यार क्या तू कह रहे थे मारो कर रहे चुदी ये तो नहीं बात ये तो शिव जरे से
and mass is it back. Need to set up.
MD to say shooter. That she can also there say they should be doing a shisha.
Oops, I changed the screen. Sorry.
차세直接차세
Yes. No, you're
가설레스
시계
400 joule.
400
쉽게.
400
말레시자레세
Leso.
so
yes everybody got 400 joules
Good.
다와 딜러 되어지더라. 디치르 텐슈디 야자디 텐슈기 갑조데 마즈고라 텐슈세고로 했다. gravity 단다 acceleration. 단다 딜러 에너지 레 네거티브 차그레 차그 말했어. 네거티브 저 차로 지도.
that's all he has a question because when you think about in this case when you think about the acceleration due to gravity acceleration is downward and in this case is the potential energy is negative 400 joules or is there any negative sign in this situation?
It's excellent question, and it's interesting that the energy, the potential energy, will still be positive, but what you computed. Hang on. Hang on 1 second. Let me pause. Let me think. Because there is a difference in the work done on the object versus what its gravitational potential energy becomes. And the potential energy is still positive in this instance. It's you might have me on a technicality that we do talk about gravitational potential energy being negative always when we're dealing with rocket ships, but it approaches zero the higher up you are. when you lift it, gravity does negative work in lifting it up. And so really what the definition is, I should have said, was the gravitational potential energy equals minus the work done by gravity, but it equals the work done by you.
하다 단다 디 간에 가서 그 상금 먹으시다 바이나 타마텔 밥사티로와 가서 디 값석이 텐슈기 네디 가서 단다게 네티기 뉴바치로와 가서 텐슈기 네티 뉴바사치로와 데 네티기 뉴바데 아니 다 스콜라기 타코마 템비기 뉴바치로와 다 뉴바치로와 데기 도소체로와 리카치주다 스콜라마 템비기 리카치치로와 저런 게 양다신 값으로와 어떻게 도서지 아니 때 니티기 니바기 단 주로한테 아니 저런 게 지주기 리카드 퓨치거와 때던 송고요레스.
It's an excellent question because there's a difference in work done by gravity versus the work done by you.
다때 조배하고도 스타디 값에 바나 카실라나 그 텐슈기 리카 지위기 리카다 아니 저런 게 지위기 리카 차게 니탄데 연구도 스타 조배하고도
And I did not specify which one it was when I gave the formula.
단단가 속에 냠쓰기 딱 거기에 냠쓰디 트래픽 값으로 맹아트 트래픽 값을 이 관계 이면데 아니 가세 시면도스.
And even though G is downwards, we often give G just a positive value of 10, but the acceleration due to gravity, we say, oh darn it, is equal to negative G.
단단데 값을 가속에 값을 그랬다. 단단게 accelerations 그러다 야타의 값이 만난데 관계도 성거래스나 네게티브 G던 성거래스.
So that's another way I can get out of having that mistake.
Can you repeat what you said? Yes.
Because the acceleration due to gravity is negative G, really the G in the equation is still positive, and the mgh is really the work done by you in raising it up.
단단데 값으로 가속에 되게 뉴넌티 동마지차고 전단다게 오델라야 ngombi 값을 아니고 지팅이 맞하고 그래서 때 값을 저런 게 이하란 딱비 값을 니가 가소치 지기요메 때 청구요레스.
It really is an excellent question because you do have to be careful with some of these things.
조배하고도 스타데데 가서 그 내던 데달라 삼루동 가서 잡서 쉬우지 보고 봤어.
None others, just make sure I can go on.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes. Yes.
Okay. I've noticed I'm a little bit ahead, but that's okay. So another form of energy is known as kinetic energy. And this is abbreviated as KE, very rarely. Often it is simply a capital K.
tako yang ko tabdi tribi kapse digila tribi kase ke e trigger is tako shu trigger ma resta namji baina ko chitang yong chep dawla ya tabdi gane ke chipu trigger is.
And it is known as the energy of motion.
That de la ya ko nguboching gusho tanjim ka ki aning gusho gi ni basigres.
And we define it as being 1/2 times the mass of the object that's moving times its speed squared.
Dada dege ngasu gusho gi ni bati ku kangitan songa de shajagre sena ani disete nyutse ge ran nijula ju ani ti cheka tamatan songres.
The definition might appear strange. It actually reveals itself from the mathematics from earlier.
That dege kuge desijang stambala ya ti consent of chi Congress in by Nayan Digi Karsugre Yongtante any Womanga Sugi Nyamtsu Kachi Zusha or Nyamtsu Kaching Sugi Gushidupagan and the Nyamtsu Kachi or taken on the time in the race.
Yeah, right now, it just looks weird. Why define it this way? But it's because of how forces and work affect the speeds of objects.
That day could dinner to the cancer or in one thing as to Leka Shuge, Nubotegi, Neko Josela, switching control to settle at any data, and the Tandagi Mango de Levaris.
And I hope to spend a moment to do that in just a few minutes or maybe after the break.
Chichinet under the Kamakashina Teleti and Mutuchians, Machona, and also person the Jela and the Tisjagins.
The kinetic energy that an object has is a result of the work that's done on that object. That work can be done by an engine, a person, by gravity, by a spring.
Legate any Mitch Kitchina Tigan, you put Tigan, Divag Legate, Migichina and Decore, and Matsu Trichig, Amagachina and Decore, and Eco Carsogore, Tenshukichina Decore, Co Karichkichina Decores.
So if we have the definition that we're, hang on, let me pause for a second, get my thoughts together. The work is equal to the change in kinetic energy.
Legate Legate can get some grace in a works for a legate can get some grace in a new booty, Gustu new buggy, Juraton some grace.
And every time we mention the word change in, that is what our delta symbol is. And change in always means final minus initial. And with kinetic energy having been defined as being 1/2 mv squared, the change in kinetic energy can be written as 1/2 times the final speed squared minus 1/2 times the initial speed squared. I used a 0 there. You might have seen an I used for the initial.
Ani jirati roa de kangetan songo kinetic energy roa guchuni wa ginjurati kangesungre sena ani thamigi guchuni wa nami thamigi guchuni wa themba imbana de la ya chekache m ola ya m tang v ga ranju tang la v f to the f set the final thamate roa ani ti nani chekache the m che ani v gi ola ya 0 chit do sansama de o triore sansama ya I triore the initial thamagi and then you say
so I think I should spend a few minutes here actually showing the mathematics of where this arose from. It looks like I just pieced it together from nowhere. So I'm going to switch to a whiteboard. Think you can see it's blank.
Yes.
Work is equal to the force times distance. And we had an equation that the final speed squared equaled the initial speed squared plus 2a delta x. Dimple briefly showed this several days ago.
다 신당 가서 again dimple again 막 가시지 거나야 아니 담 녀세 담하게 런지 정때 토미게 녀세가 런지 정 같을래 아니 니티 아니 윤노라 줄때 아니 장탁건 줄었던 줄바다 총아지 저스님아 가신 거는 못 지어레스.
If we look at the force, we can rewrite the force on this side of the equation. We're going to work a little bit on both sides of the equation. I can say force is mass times acceleration.
다 바저스쇼 인샬라 줄었듯이 담바이바나 단다 되기 슈디 아니 디세티 윤노게 줄었던 총거레스.
Now, I have here acceleration times delta x, where I can see acceleration times delta x over here on this equation.
단다데 가서가 줄라야 그래라고도 AT 아니 델타 X 그 주주치도와 대형 추적차게 예쇼차게 냠스티나나야 에타 델타 X 지도와.
So I'm going to play with this equation over here and make it a delta x equaling a whole bunch of other stuff.
다 주주차게 예쇼차라 옆에 냠스티게 나네고 야마 땅데티 아니 A 당 delta X 대 관계 지동 초면기 아니 네탄지 용어지야 인스.
One way I can do this is subtract the initial speed squared from both sides of the equation.
다 제탄티 갈라나 냠스게 이연 샤네 네 토마게 가사 뉴체가 란지 정대 템바이나.
So that gives us this one, that VF squared minus VI squared is 2a delta x.
다 팀바나 갈사그레스나 아니 타미기 뉴체 란지 정네 토미란 뉴체가 란지 정 템바이나 2a delta x 차고레스.
So now if I divide the 2 across to the other side,
다 니찰라야 이연 니찰라야 네 니가 뭐 바이나.
then I have this expression of 1/2. I'll leave it outside the velocities, that this equals a delta x.
다 대응한 속에 니티 파절로 동반의 그거로 그거바이나 아니 단단한 소라야티 제까지 아니 위 파이널 란지정 위 이니셜 란지정 템바이나 a delta x 차고레스.
So now I want to take this expression and substitute it in for a delta x.
다 단단하게 지조살라 라주 때에 파절차게 a delta x게 참라치기인스.
And when I do that, I end up that this is equal to, I could write it as m over 2. Well, now maybe let me multiply the m inside the brackets. Fix that. So it's 1/2 times mv squared. Oh, no, I'm messing up again. Whoops. mvf squared minus mvi squared.
다들 주바임바나 그 제까지 안에 나올라야 MT게 타미기 뉴스 란지 정 지로 되게 나네 아니 MT 토미기 란지 벌써 뉴스가 란지 정 템바데 친구도.
Then if we distribute the 1/2 across as well, I have 1/2 mvf squared minus 1/2 mvi squared.
다가 제가 되게 니샬을 주바임바나 제까지 아니 MV 파이널 란지 정체 되게 나네 제가 되게 아니 MTV 이니셜 란지 정 지로 템바데 친구です.
And it's really, this mathematics here is why we defined one of these terms inside here as being this new entity, kinetic energy.
Da tanda nga tsu de la ya thopang dina rabi ge tangka kangrong chi sigurwa ta de na la rabi ge ani ko tangka kangrong chi ani tanda nga tsu mutu chi wi guchu ge niba se tin bala ya de yores.
So if we have this new quantity, then this equation becomes K final minus K initial.
Da tanda nga tsu ge ke ti ani guchu ge niba ke se ti ani cheka ti MB ranj tang ge jo ta chonggu yo pa na ani tanda nga tsu ge de la ra ba ti ani tang guchu ge niba thamag na ne guchu niba thuma thamba ta chonggu yores.
So it's really this mathematics is why we defined kinetic energy as being what it is, because it's a new thing that we could tie to work.
Da tanda dis tambala ya nitan de la tre de tenga tsu ge guchu ge niba te ani dinner do chi imba ro ko ge menga de dinner chi imba chonggu yores. De ge nga tsu ge ani ko guchu ge niba te ta ani lika ni cha ko ni ko ron ro tu yores.
And with that, I should pause. I see like we're technically a minute over, but I wanted to show the mathematics so that it doesn't look like I invented something.
Tanda dere nga tsu samsha gens kamachi spa drishas de ka singe sabto ka chichi yo mares chetsula ya de ge ansi ge kun jawate karimba te tamba zamins.
Okay, so we'll see you in half an hour, right?
Yes. La soch so chekan jela jay